While this episode of this podcast was in production, Buckingham Palace announced that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II passed away. The Heartland Author podcast offers condolences to the people of Britain and the Commonwealth during this time of mourning. You are listening to another episode of the Heartland Author podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, I had the honor of interviewing Barbara Mojica, the author of the Little Miss History series of children's nonfiction books. I'm here with Barbara Mojica. How do you pronounce your last name?
Mojica.
Mojica?
Right.
Barbara is the author of the Little Miss History series. Barbara, welcome to the Heartland Author podcast.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I'm really happy to be here today.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Okay, introduce myself. Well, pretty simple. I have a lot of different hats. I am a parent, a grandparent, a historian, an educator who worked with children for more than 40 years. And now I am recently an author. As you mentioned, I write a children's series of nonfiction history books, and my mission is to help children understand their history, their heritage, and to make them aware that it is so important to understand our history because we cannot possibly understand where we are today or where we're going to be going in the future if we don't understand how we got here in the first place. And I provide children and parents and teachers with the tools to accomplish those ends.
Now, without spoiling too much of your books, what is the Little Miss History series of books about, and how many books are there in the series?
Well, there are currently 14 books in the main series, Little Miss History Travels 2. There are 2 additional books. There is one book that is a trilogy book. It has 3 of my stories combined into one, and that was done to help New York teachers who wanted to take 3 of my books that talked about various sites in New York and use them to teach children the New York State curriculum. So that book has 3 of the titles in one. I also have a coloring book that's a rather unique coloring book. It's not a coloring book in the traditional sense. It is a book that contains hand-drawn portraits of a lot of the famous characters in history. It also has quotes, very, very important things that those characters have handed down to us. And in addition, it has a few activities to do. But the main part of the series, the 14 books, the Little Miss History Travels 2, cover various people in places in history. And my books are historically based, but they also impinge upon a lot of other disciplines. So in my books, not only do I talk about history, and history not in the sense of dates and events, but as exploring a whole evolution of how things occurred and why they became important to us. But my books, some of them cover science, some of them cover nature, they cover world history, they cover American history, I touch upon national parks, and I also talk about military history as well.
Now, are the books in the Little Miss History series self-published or traditionally published?
Well, they are published with a small publishing company. They are more, I would call them very close to being self-published because there is no big company involved in the process. I write the books. My illustrator, who is also my husband, does also the graphic layout, and he does all of the physical illustration and the whole printing end of it. The only thing that we really do not do is physically print the books.
Okay. Now, this next question, I'm going to uh, acknowledge that your husband is the illustrator for your books, but what is your typical writing routine if you have one?
Well, the typical way of approaching each of my books is pretty much the same. The first step is selecting a topic that I feel children would be interested in. And the topics, again, as I said, they range a great deal. Some of them are about famous places like Independence Hall. Others are about national parks. So the approach, though, first is generally to visit the site. And my books are mixed media, so we will be using photography from the site as well as the illustrations, which would involve hand-drawn portraits and other background work. So the first step is generally visiting the site. Then I start writing the material. I do historical research, and I combine that with my knowledge as of the physical visit of the site. I write. I don't do rough drafts. I generally do the research and then I put it together into a first draft. And because this is a children's book, it has to be very much refined and edited to make it palatable for a child to read. So it usually involves about 12 rewrites until I get the book down to where I want it as far as the word length. And most of my books run between 600 and 800 words. After that's done and I have the physical script, it would go to illustration. And that would involve my husband doing the thumbnails, sketches, and then after the thumbnails, we would move on to finished physical drawings that will be combined with the photography. And occasionally I have another step of revision at that point, because sometimes the illustrations don't mesh perfectly with the script, and the artist's vision is a little bit different from the writer's vision. So again, sometimes we have to tweak things and change the order a little bit. And that's the last step of the process for me. At that point, the book would be physically uploaded, laid out, and then it would be sent to the printer. So that's my approach for every one of the books.
Now, do you plan on writing more books in the Little Miss History series and or writing books outside of the series?
I do plan on writing more books. In fact, I have several manuscripts in stages of development. I have a few ideas on a couple of more tweaks to the series. I may do one or more of those books that combine several titles that revolve around the same theme. I do have several books about military history involving things like the Intrepid, the Air and Space Museum, and the battleship Iowa. I may be doing a few more of those trilogy types of books, and I may even be taking Little Miss History off on a little bit of a tangent, and I may be exploring some of the shorter stories that I've written about history for various publications, and I may be making them into a kind of short story collection with Little Miss History.
Now, before I ask this question, I'm going to acknowledge that the coloring book of sorts can't be made available in an ebook format because of the technical limitations of ebooks. You can't draw on those.
No.
But some of your books are available in ebook format as part of the Kindle Unlimited subscription services. And then you have one book that's in ebook format on Amazon Kindle, but not part of Kindle Unlimited. And some of your books are only available in physical book formats. How do you determine which books are available on which platforms?
Well, generally, I make the print book available first, and then later go to the ebook format, because the books are so highly visual and the books are very much interactive. Within all of the books, I ask the children questions, and I ask them to think about a lot of these topics and discuss them. And I have developed a set of questions for each of the books. So when I do physical visits and I go into classrooms, or I talk to children virtually face to face, I do have a whole series of discussion questions. So I like the books to be very much interactive and interdisciplinary. That's a little bit harder to do in the digital format. So I focus more on the print books. A lot of my books are paperback. Some of them are hardcover, and I went to hardcover in some instances because teachers and librarians prefer hardcover books because they last longer in classrooms. So that's the reason for the differentiation there. But I will be making more and more books of the available in digital format as well, and I am in the process of doing that with some of the already published books now.
And the next question I have is about a quote of yours that you live by. You firmly believe that if you don't know your history, you don't know what you're talking about. Why do you believe that teaching and learning about history is important?
Oh, that little quote is from my character. I use a character to narrate the series called Little Miss History.
Okay.
That's why I have the title, Little Miss History Travels To. And Little Miss History is a younger version of me. My illustrator developed that character based on a younger version of myself. As a youngster, I always loved history. Because I wanted to explore, I wanted to travel, I wanted to put myself in the shoes of other people and understand what was their motivation, what was their feeling. And that's how I always, got into that whole process. And I think children should be interested in that as well, because what is the first question a child asks? Well, basically, it's who am I? Where did I come from? Where? Who is my family? Where do the members of my family come from? And this place that I live in, this community, where did these people come from? How did they get together? Why do I eat the foods I eat? Why do I have the customs and traditions that I have? All of that is tied up in history, and everything in the world has a history. That we don't just start somewhere. There's always something that has come before us. And what has come before us helps us to understand how we got to where we are today, why we're doing the things we're doing. And if we use all of this as a framework, we can better prepare for where we're going. Yes, the old saying is history sometimes repeats itself. But if we don't know the what has happened before, we can understand why people did what they did, and we can't understand their motivation. We can't understand why they did it, but maybe what was wrong what they did, or maybe what was right what they did. And we can't prejudge people today on the basis of what we know today, because they didn't have the same experiences we have. So it's very important for children to understand that a worldview isn't determined by what we are experiencing right now. That things were different in the past, things are different today, and things will be very different in the future. And we witness that today with our rapidly changing world, our digital world with social media. And I think it's very important for children to understand and know their history, because history is fact. It's not something that is opinion, and we are so based on opinion today. Everything is our social group, and on what our friends think and what our friends do, and is there, maybe there is more than one answer to things. I think children need to understand history to become open-minded, to see that there are various points of view, to see that things can be done more than one way, and that they're not always right. Sometimes they're wrong, sometimes they're right. But if we use what we learn, we can better understand where we are and how we can proceed to developing a better future for ourselves and the world around us.
And my final question for this interview: what are some ways that parents can help their children and educators help their students develop critical thinking skills?
Critical thinking is so important. And again, critical thinking means being able to focus on a problem and being able to look at the facts, being able to analyze, and being able to realize that everything happens within a whole range of issues. So an event might happen, but there are all kinds of things that are affecting the event, not just the people who are experiencing the event, but all of the influences around them, the society around them, the way they're communicating with each other, the context of other events happening at the same time. All of those things have to be taken into consideration. And today, children are expecting things to happen instantly. They expect to be able to go on the internet, type in a question, and get the answer. Now, that answer is not necessarily true. It's not necessarily a full answer, because they're not taking the time to analyze all the variables. So critical thinking is a lot like science. You have to know all the variables. You have to know how one thing is affecting the other thing in order to sit down and analyze. Parents need to help their children do that. They need to help their children understand that there's not just my way or the highway. There's not just the way your particular peer group is approaching a problem, but they have to be open to listening to all sides of an issue. They have to be willing to take the time. And I try to give children ways to develop critical thinking skills. In my books, I ask them very deep questions, opinion questions, and I ask them to think about things and to express their opinion. I have a YouTube channel. I do mini teaching lessons. I do videos. I have all kinds of things that help them to develop critical thinking skills. Parents can do that by not always expecting children to do things one way. Again, parents need to tell children that there is more than one way. They need to teach children that there is a way to negotiate things, that there are people who have certain biases, that they have to be aware that some people have opinions, and opinions are not the same thing as facts. Teaching them the difference between a fact and an opinion. Teaching children to converse with the parent, to discuss things, to when a child disagrees with a parent, the parent should help the child to develop an argument, to speak to the parent rationally and logically, expressing their point of view, and to expect adults as well as children to listen. Same thing in the classroom. Teachers have to allow children to develop their curiosity, to have a certain boldness to raise questions, and not to expect that instant answer. To take the time to think carefully about things, not to be so dependent on what they hear on a 5-minute newscast or what they see in a post on social media and accepting that as gospel truth.
Well, Barbara, I thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author podcast. You are a wonderful guest.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed having time to talk with you.
Barbara was a wonderful guest for this podcast. As Little Miss History says, if you don't know your history, you don't know what you're talking about. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.witsite.com/author AAC. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at author AAC and on Instagram at AAC Scribe. Copyright 2022, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.